16 millimeter color film of that fight that no one had ever seen before.
Really?
Yeah, some slow motion, all shot from the apron inside the ropes. It's just spectacular.
And that fight, that's awesome. I love seeing different, different ways of viewing it.
Yeah, there's a nice HBO film about that fight, which I'd seen, and being able to present the fight, our version of it, with this new footage.
Yeah.
It allowed us to offer another perspective on it.
Oh, no, cool. But I really enjoyed seeing the footage for the second of this one. Was that the Birth of the Nation one or HBO, or which one, or was that the Ali, the one they were, which you said you did for HBO? I don't
remember what it was called. It was the whole thing was just on the Thrill in Manila. But I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
Joe Frazier is in it. It's from a couple of years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
But we've had some, that story's already been told. It was in that film.
Right.
So why did you need to tell it again?
Yeah.
I go, just watch.
Right. Nice.
Excuse me for 1 second.
Uh-huh.
I'm just afraid. I don't know if y'all heard that, but that was like a crazy alarm situation. And then the children of my neighborhood are amassing in the street. So fingers crossed.
Hey, that's why I stay in a hotel, because that's what happens to me. The UPS or FedEx, and then they ring the doorbell, and then they keep going. Like I have to sign something. Like when I'm doing it all day, it won't be that way. They'll just leave it there. But when something like this, that's why I never stay home.
Are you in San Diego and then you just decided to go to a hotel?
Hotel, yeah. Yep.
Oh, that is the way.
Yeah, that's what. Anytime I do presentations, where I always stay in a hotel, because that's when it's amazing what happens.
They know the universe conspires.
That's right.
Well, fingers crossed for me today.
You'll be fine.
We're about 3 minutes out. So Claudia, in a minute, if you can pop up the screen share, please.
Okay. I don't understand what's going on here. So I'm gonna shut a few things off because it's not bringing up my photos. So just one quick hot second. Oops.
Okay, so we are 2 minutes out. So if everyone can turn off their cameras. If Claudine happens to not get the picture up, that's not a problem. I'll still give you the go cue, Cristina, and that's when you will start your welcome. So if there's a picture up on the screen or not, we'll still stick to the cue that you'll get in the chat box.
Stay unmuted.
As long as you're quiet, you can stay unmuted.
Okay.
But not another word from now on.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Cristina Kim, KPBS racial justice and social equity reporter. Thank you so much for joining us for this exclusive event for our KPBS Directors Club and KPBS Producer Club members. We hope you enjoyed the preview of Muhammad Ali. I know when I first watched this preview, I couldn't help but cry at the end. So even though I can't see you, if you are shedding a tear right now, please know that I feel you and I felt the very same thing. Muhammad Ali meant so much to so many people. Tonight, we have the amazing opportunity to discuss just a little bit of who Muhammad Ali was and the impact that he had not only on boxing, but on the world itself. Joining me for tonight's discussion are the writer and director of the film, David McMahon, if he can join us, please. Dr. Roy Whitaker, Associate Professor of Black Religions and American Religious Diversity at San Diego State University. If you could join us now, Roy. And junior middleweight boxing champion, Paul the Ultimate Vaden. If you can join us now, Paul. Welcome, all of you. Please make sure that you are unmuted. I am so excited to have you here on this panel. And David, I just wanted to start with you. You spent 4 years poring over Muhammad Ali's life. What was it about Ali that made you decide to make a movie about him, an 8-hour movie about him?
Well, hi, everybody. And thank you, Cristina. And thanks to the team at KPBS for having this event. We've been working on this film for a very long time. And this is the best part, to be able to have these discussions and finally begin talking about and spreading the word about the film. The idea came to us about 7 years ago. The writer and journalist John Eig out of Chicago was writing a big biography. He's a friend of ours. And he got in touch and said, there are a lot of films about Muhammad Ali, but I think there's an opening for you to do something comprehensive. And we said, okay, we poked around and we found that there had been a great many really nice movies made about Muhammad Ali, but they were about a single chapter or a single fight, one event in his life, but there was nothing that took all of these threads and braided them together, the spiritual journey, the political activism, the boxing career, and put them all in one place. So we felt that we had an opportunity. And so we also thought that we could offer new perspective and that we could find new material that people hadn't seen before. And that even then we understood that Muhammad Ali would feel timely. And this many years later, after a rise of Black Lives Matter, after the murder of George Floyd, after Breonna Taylor, after Tamir Rice, it feels more timely as ever. It feels like Muhammad Ali is speaking to the moment. We didn't set out to make a definitive portrait of Muhammad Ali, but we felt like it would be timely, and we feel like it's a story that should be told over and over.
And I think that's what we're just going to get a little bit of today, is just trying to reach all the different facets of Muhammad Ali, but also the fact that he feels really personal still, really of the moment, and people have relationships to Ali, whether it's real or imagined, they feel very visceral and very of the moment. Paul, you have actually been in a boxing ring, something that I know I can't say, and I think many of us can't say. What is your earliest memory of Muhammad Ali, and who is he in your life, especially as a boxer?
Thank you once again for having me. I'm glad to be here. Muhammad Ali, simply said, he was my superhero. I mean, there's Superman, there's Batman, as a child. Muhammad Ali was my superhero. At 4 years old, I saw him and I wanted to be him. What he portrayed in the ring, what I would see, the fluidity, he was very graceful. The way he carried himself, there was just something very special about him. And at 8 years old, I started to become a boxer, meaning competitively, with the sole goal of becoming a world champion. Now, you've got to understand, as I start to grow and I started to be able to read and research and watch, I started to understand through this distance, back then, the 15 rounds, there was a lot of other layers to Muhammad Ali. There was a lot of other great things about him, other than his artistry in the ring. And so in wanting to become a champion, as I got closer to that goal, I started to understand that there was a bigger purpose, a bigger responsibility, a bigger reason for being those intangibles in the ring. And that was all because of me following the path, the trails of Muhammad Ali as a trailblazer. So he's everything to me. He's the sole reason why I started boxing.
You know, in that preview and in the film, we hear that Muhammad Ali was kind of found boxing when his bicycle was stolen. Could you say that Ali's life and the legacy he left, was that your red bike moment? Can you pinpoint a moment in your life where you're like, that's when I found boxing and I knew I was going to do my life that way?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because through my workouts in the morning, I think about this and I say, thank God that bike was never located. Think about that. If they found his bike and they said, oh, it was around the corner, someone else had it, we would not have the expressions, the voice, the swag, the very intangibles. Like I said, these unique intangibles that this man had. If his bike was found, I would possibly have never became a boxer. And not only that, trailblazing into the other things that I'm doing today. So I didn't have that moment other than seeing him and wanting to be like him. But if he had found his bike, I possibly never would have became a boxer, and who knows what would have happened with him. But he's everything to me.
It's those little moments in life that kind of build up on each other, right? And we don't even understand how we're impacting other people. But I have to say, we have a little bit of a special treat. Dr. Roy Whitaker, right before we started this panel, actually showed us that he had a special moment in his life that he didn't tell us about until today. And we're going to share it now. So Dr. Whitaker, tell us a little bit about this photo and how you came to meet the greatest.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, Cristina, and thank everyone in the KPBS family for inviting me. This is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here to honor the legacy of Muhammad Ali. Yeah, this particular picture says a lot, and I couldn't say no to being part of this wonderful panel, partly because of the fact of what Ali has meant to me and my family. This picture is actually a picture of me and the greatest at the tender age of 4. And this was taken by my father. My father is a professional photographer. And this picture in 1978 was actually the year that Ali was the first fighter to win the world heavyweight boxing title 3 times. So it's a major milestone in the life of Ali. I'll also know, just on a personal note that we're starting here, is that I haven't shared this with too many people, but I have a brother. My brother's middle name is Ali, named after Muhammad Ali. And actually, before I was invited to participate in this panel, I actually have plans over Thanksgiving to go to Louisville, and I'm going to the Muhammad Ali Center. So just gives you a little bit of a insight, a little bit into how Ali has impacted my life a bit.
I do want to just ask a follow-up there. I think so much of how we learn about people is what our parents tell us about them. So your father took that photo. He was a photographer. How did he describe Ali to you? What was the legacy that he was kind of giving to you?
The legacy of Ali in my own childhood was larger than life. I don't and can't think of anyone other than Ali who stood shoulders above him. I grew up in a family household, listening to Motown, listening to music, but sports was something that was definitely something that was inspiring to all of us. And to be able to have contact with somebody of that stature meant so much to me and to my family. So it was basically just being in that type of environment where, as an African-American, you're looking for heroes. And you have one in Muhammad Ali, who was a global icon, and somebody who carried himself with great integrity, somebody to look up to in all facets of life. So I would just say that it was a grounding fixture in our life, spiritually, politically, emotionally, somebody who was able to confront life and do what it took in the face of onslaught to be the best version of himself. And that kind of legacy is something that I think has impacted me, and I think a lot of people, no doubt, around the world.
He was also a complicated figure. I think now we have really seen him as a hero in which everyone can agree, but there was times where he really brought up conflict. You know, one of the worlds in which he was part of was civil rights, but he didn't fit in neatly into that. Dr. Whitaker, can you just tell us, like, how did he fit in there, and why was he kind of a controversial figure even within the civil rights movement?
Great question. Ali, and I would probably argue many great people, are complex figures. And what happened partly is the fact of Ali's reaffirmation of his religious identity vis-a-vis the Nation of Islam. So today, I think it's quite easy to be a fan of Ali and to think that you're standing in his legacy. But at the time, he was vilified. He was up against it. He took positions that are not popular and easy, and this is not going to make you friends quite easily. So partly his outspoken nature and his outspoken reaffirmation of his religious identity really casts a negative spell upon him and the large swaths of American population. In the 1960s, 1965, there was greater religious diversity, greater religious pluralism, partly because of the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. So there was, people coming from different parts of the world, quotas being lowered, but at the same time, it was primarily a Protestant Christian dominated culture. And so you're part of the Nation of Islam, you're viewed as the other, and this is a countercultural movement, the Nation of Islam, that he participates in. And he, in this kind of movement, is going to be a separatist movement originally, and it's going to critique American hegemony and, basically shine a light to America, saying, Ali is too, that America is not living up to its liberty, equality, fraternity that it preaches in light of institutional racism. So he's going to prod at this. And this is going to create a fissure within the life of Ali, in which he's going to have a double bind. He's going to be a religious minority, part of the Nation of Islam, and he's also a racial minority. So, the strength he had in the ring is one type of strength, but the internal fortitude was much stronger. So these are facets about Ali that I think are important, that really put him, outside of the mainstream, and then in Vietnam War and other things as well.
David, how did you go about, as the writer and filmmaker, of really creating that narrative arc where we can understand that complexity, especially when it's not such a straightforward thing? As we heard in the preview, when he's in Africa, he calls a sweeping civil rights bill counterfeit money. He's really defining liberation as a separate kind of notion within the United States. How do you go about teasing that out and telling it in its full complexity?
Well, early on, I figured out that it was maybe best seen as a spiritual journey. It's many other things, but this is a man who, as he's coming of age in segregated Louisville, at a time of Jim Crow, at a time when he's looking through a chain link fence at white kids riding amusement park rides, and he can't go in that amusement park and ride those rides. He's got a father who is a painter, but is not afforded the same opportunities as the white painters, and he's frustrated. He was a follower of Marcus Garvey. He's telling his son, Cassius Clay, that he'll never be able to be rich because of the color of his skin. And Cassius is looking for a way to make sense of this segregated world. And Dr. Whitaker just spoke so eloquently about the Nation of Islam, and he discovers the record by Louis X, who would become Louis Farrakhan, "White man's heaven is a black man's hell." And this, I think, helps him make sense of the world, the Nation of Islam, its principles, helps him make sense of the world that he inhabits. It begins a spiritual journey. And he eventually meets Elijah Muhammad. And you can see how this spiritual journey that he's on, his faith touches every aspect of his life. And so when he refuses the draft, he's drafted into the Vietnam War. When the press first gets to him on that day, his thoughts are a little disorganized. He goes to see the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. The next day, he has a very coherent statement about why he's not going to go off 10,000 miles to fight poor brown people. Elijah Muhammad refused induction during the Second World War and went to jail for it. And so there are these moments across his career. When he gets in the ring to fight, you can see him pray beforehand. He often praises Allah afterwards. When he fought George Foreman, people thought, not only is he going to lose, he may die. But many have said that in the minutes before that fight, as he was praying, he just seemed so confident because he had this faith. Elijah Muhammad dies in the mid-70s. His son Wallace Muhammad takes the reins on the organization and steers it towards a more mainstream version of Islam. Muhammad comfortably goes with him in that direction. His sense of his faith probably more resembled Wallace's, the direction Wallace was taking it anyways. But he spends the next decades of his life spreading the gospel about his religion. And it's an open version of it. And so I was, from the beginning, I felt like we could see him come of age, follow his career in the ring, and then his final decades when he's faced with this brutal disease, Parkinson's. But the common thing through all of it is his faith.
We actually have a question from an audience member, Richard. do you think the negative perception of Islam in America that it sometimes persists even to this day will have an impact on Ali's legacy? I will let anyone answer that if they feel like they have a response. But I will also call on you if everyone is silent.
His association with the Nation of Islam, does it have a negative impact on his legacy?
Right. Well, Richard seems, yes, you got it.
As Dr. Whitaker said before, Muhammad Ali was reviled for his association with the Nation of Islam. And in the mid-60s, and especially in the early 60s, this was an organization that people feared. It was a separatist religious sect that was talking about breaking away from the United States. And people felt that it was kind of a menacing organization. Well, our sense of it evolved in the same way that our sense of the Vietnam War evolved. But Muhammad stood by his principles in all cases, and he was exiled from the sport for his beliefs, for his faith, for his refusal to go to the draft. When he came back, by that time, 3 years later, the war wasn't as popular as it was when he refused induction. And people began to see him as the wisdom of his original position. The Nation of Islam didn't seem as menacing anymore. Lots of people on the front lines of civil rights, Black activists had moved out of that arena and into politics. Black people were taking positions as mayor. The Nation of Islam sort of receded. It didn't seem as frightening. And so the country changed. Muhammad maybe stayed where he was, and people kind of came to him. He also just became more popular. When he lost to Joe Frazier, he, in a very soft-spoken manner afterwards, he said, "It was just a fight. I lost. You'll lose too. It's okay. You can look to me to see how I handle this." And so he gave people signals that it was safe to come to him. By the time he fights George Foreman in the mid-70s, he's wildly popular. He wins this fight, and he's the most beloved man on the planet. And so you can see this evolution. I don't think he'll be remembered for his association with the Nation of Islam. I think he'll be remembered as a man who was authentically himself and gave people inspiration to be authentically themselves.
And that's actually something I'm going to jump off of, David, which is, we talked a lot about his bravado. Like, when you watch him, he is inspiring. He believes in himself. There's this confidence and this grin on his face that is inspiring. And at the time, it was also unheard of and unseen in a Jim Crow South that he came from. Like, to act that way was just not the norm. And that was the inspiration. And I'm curious, Paul, like, do you think that he changed the way that you understood Black manhood and Black masculinity? Because that's often how we see him now, is kind of redefining what it means to be a Black man in America in a whole new way.
It's a very good question. The thing about Ali is, at a time when we were told not to talk, not to be expressive, not to say what was going on in our minds, he would. And he was profound about it. He was eloquent about it, but he was also peaceful about it. Meaning, you never heard about Muhammad Ali ever getting into an altercation outside of the sport. He may have been hyping up a fight, meaning playing around with people, but Muhammad Ali was very eloquent and about his purpose. He was very direct about it. So for me, it just showed me, once again, here I'm seeing the individual at a time when we were being muted, people who look like me, to have a person who have a voice, to have an individual that would go on a Mike Douglas show and talk about really in-depth, like, stuff beyond sports. I mean, things of that, being on various shows, it became an education. He was very educated about his purpose. And I say this, I always say this about Muhammad Ali. There's a song, my favorite song, called "Man in the Mirror." It's about accountability, and it's about yourself. A lot of us do not have that willingness to look in the mirror. And I always say Muhammad Ali is that individual who could easily stare in the mirror, knowing that he didn't do anything the PC way. He spoke, he was profound about what he felt, and he followed through. Remember this, he laid it on the line. We never saw his prime as an artist, as a boxer, as a performer. People always ask me, who will win against Muhammad Ali? This person, their prime against Ali in his prime. I said, you have to remember something. First off, Ali would win. First off, I said, first off, let me get that out of the way. Second, you never saw Muhammad Ali in his prime. You never saw his prime, because when his prime happened, he was in exile because of the principles of as a man. And that goes back to that mirror. When you can look in the mirror and you can go through those rounds of life and understand that, yeah, I lost. It's bigger than money. It's bigger than people. You know, I'm the most, right now, people don't like me. I'm not popular. I'm hated. I'm the most hated man in America. But let the fight go through. People are going to understand. And if you look at a lot of, you know, publications, whatever, there were people who didn't look like Muhammad Ali and didn't look like me, who were also saying he was speaking for me as well. He was also speaking for me. So because he had a voice, and like I said, he was eloquent about it, but he was also loving about it as well.
Paul, I want to go back to that role of athletes can play in activism, in speaking and using their platform. But Dr. Whitaker, I saw you nodding your head a lot during Paul's response. And so I am curious, have you kind of contemplated the way that Ali changed masculinity, kind of changed a way of being in America?
Thank you for the question. I think just to also sort of dovetail into David's response and Paul's response to the questions that they answered, just to sort of bring that together, I agree. And with respect to, I think regarding sort of the earlier question, if I may address it, sort of the Nation of Islam and whether that's sort of a lasting stain, let's call it that way, amongst how people will judge Muhammad Ali. I think that it was really clear in the documentary that, and this is sort of one of my thesis or major points, I really think that the life of Ali says almost as much about the nation as much as about Ali, the context in which he had to fight and to maintain his integrity and authenticity in. And we see that years afterwards that people will acknowledge, no, Ali was right about the Vietnam War, right? And the onslaught he had to deal with in the context of even being a professional athlete at that level is quite amazing. So I think that over time, there's been an evolution of human consciousness. So, I mean, since, you know, Ali, we had an African-American president and so forth. So over time, in terms of the arc of history, we're able to reappraise religious communities, religious traditions, and rethink race in America over time. Though the fight structurally is not over, you know, in terms of institutional racism. Paul makes up an excellent point about, and you raise it too, the issue of masculinity, issues of in the context of this conversation. And what I would say is that I think the struggle we find, and we find this in Black Lives Matter and other movements that we see, is that the difficulty I think that Ali found and he discovered well is that it was just difficult to find safe spaces for Black men, Black people in general. Okay, so where are the safe spaces? And he founded the Nation of Islam. In terms of the issue of the rhetoric, I think that he is a genius. His charisma, his candidness, and his charm, and he needs to get more credit for. One way to think about it in a short synopsis is this. What Muhammad Ali said, it also did, but also what he said is really how many Black people speak in private. That's one way to think about it. So he becomes the outspoken voice against a system that was oppressive. And when a person or group historically are oppressed, they have a double job. They have to free themselves and feed the oppressor. It's a double job, and it's really, really difficult. But I think his rhetoric is something that deserves more credit. And it's also mixed with humor. And I think that's something that we are entertained by and we are educated by. You know, I wrestle with alligators and put lightning in jail. You know? And there's this idea where you have to find in the midst of the most heartache, some sense of joy, which is also sort of the history of African-American struggle in which they're able to keep on keeping on.
David, how about you? How did you kind of place yourself in this, locate yourself with this? You know, obviously, Muhammad Ali meant a lot to the Black community because of everything we've just discussed, but he meant a lot to other people, Latinos, Asians, white people. So how did you kind of go into that film with your particular location and identity?
Well, I look to Muhammad to be my North Star. And so there's an astonishing amount of material. He has to be among the most well-documented figures of the 20th century. And we were able to gather over 500 hours of film when we put this film together, and over 15,000 photographs from among many more that we made available to our editors to edit into the movie. And so we could all look to him, and we had a diverse team and we all had our own relationships to him, but we could all look to him to figure out how to tell the story, because he doesn't on camera shy away from his flaws. He tells you exactly how he feels. He's a showman. The promoters would say he's better at promoting his fights than we are. He makes every single fight about more than the fight. The stakes are always higher. It's a battle between Islam and Christianity. It's a battle for who's the more authentic Black man. The stakes are always so high. And so he would tell us what it is we should be focused on. He would tell us what's in the foreground and what's in the background. And I think that made our jobs much easier, because when we tackle a subject, we want to make sure that we scrape off all the myth that is attached to it. And we want to dig around and find everything authentic we can about the figure. And Muhammad just lays it all bare. I mean, I think in part because of his spirituality, at the end of his life, as he's taking the measure of his own life, he's pointing at the things that he wished might have gone differently. Perhaps he could have treated Joe Frazier differently. Perhaps things could have ended differently with Malcolm X. He had 4 wives and he had trouble with infidelity. Maybe he could have done better by them. And so he's showing us how to contemplate our own existence. And I've never had a subject like that before, who we just said, well, let's just listen to him and he will take us by the hand and walk us through this journey.
We are running out of time, but I really want to ask this of you, Paul, because I think what we see a lot as an athlete from Muhammad Ali is him taking a platform and taking an opinion and taking a risk and taking a loss for it. I think we've seen a lot more activism in the last couple of years with Colin Kaepernick, with really all of the WNBA last year really taking a stand for Black Lives Matter. Do you see a through line with what Ali started, or do you think Ali started it? And what do you think is the role of athletes in activism and in kind of leading social progress?
So understanding that you're more than an athlete. I mean, I know it's cliche thing right now you hear, but you're more than an athlete. You can't just take the perks and the notoriety and everything that comes is good and not understand the sacrifice and not understand that sometimes you're not going to be liked for what you say, but you have to have a stance. Your stance has to have that level of durability. And I keep using the 15-round talk because of Muhammad Ali and 15 rounds. But as you keep coming back, keep imploring and positivity in your beliefs that your stance is going to outlast questioning and negativity and skepticism and what have you. And I believe that Muhammad Ali is, to me, the one that started, because like I said, it started with the voice. He was braggadocious, the Louisville lip. And like I said, because we were so confined to not being able to speak, here's a person who was going to speak and be loud about it, but also prove you wrong. Because you think about people coming to see him fight to win, and most at that time coming to see him to lose. But you had to pay attention to him. So that means you had to pay attention to what he was saying as well, whether you liked them or not. So I believe that it is, remember I talked about the purpose, responsibility is bigger than the craft that you're doing. And you have to exercise those items and prolong it to extend your career beyond, because everyone has this term about when the lights go out. The lights don't have to if you understand that there's another base, another level of elevation that you can go. And I think Muhammad Ali showed you that. Remember, my favorite victory, they always say my favorite victory was beating Foreman. Beating Foreman was the biggest thing that's the biggest victory in life. But remember something, that same man who knocked out George Foreman is the same man who also sat down with Saddam Hussein and negotiated the release of 15 U.S. citizens in 1990. Now that's a lot of strength, and that goes beyond the boxing standpoint. So that's what I'm talking about. You have to expect that expansiveness has to soar, and that's why I think this guy is the undisputed GOAT. Undisputed GOAT.
We are wrapping up, but I want to just ask everyone. I feel like, Paul, you just kind of gave your concluding sentence of what I'm about to ask, which is that he is the GOAT. But as we're wrapping up, Roy, Dr. Whitaker, I know you teach your students a little bit about Muhammad Ali, but as people leave here tonight, what is kind of a message from Muhammad Ali that you think should be known and kind of resonate still?
Well, again, thank you for having me in this esteemed panel, and thank you for being part of this moment for the KPBS family. Sort of a takeaway, there's a lot. One thing that comes to my mind is that Ali represents his people and the people. And he was the people's champ, even when he wasn't allowed to fight. And he stayed true to himself and his convictions. And he was clear about who he was. And I think that that's something that is something that could, stay with us even to this moment in time. This the ringing of authenticity in him is something that exudes, I feel, from watching the documentary. And what I get from Ali, in short, is this really appreciation that in his understanding of religion, and I really think that the red line is religiosity, his spirituality. It's not just what you believe in, but it's what you do. It's not just about, counting your days, but making your days count. And, it was interesting in the documentary, you get the sense of he's the most beautiful athlete in motion. And you see that both in the ring and outside of the ring. And I, again, think that at the end of the day, it really senses, in my sense to me, the reason why he's, the timeliness of Ali is sort of eternal, is that I think it's a clarion call for all of us to rethink ourselves relative to how we understand ourselves relative to other people. And how can we be better human beings, one to another, and to this larger ecosystem, this larger world. So yeah, what was interesting as I just thought about being part of this panel, there's a sense in which, you may not remember everything Ali said, but sort of quoted from Maya Angelou, it's not just simply remembering what people say, but you remember what people make you feel. And I really think that that's something that is able to transcend everything, regardless of your language, your culture, your background, your geography. You watch this documentary, you read books about Muhammad Ali. There is something about him in this eternalness to him that he is at root trying to make everyone become and feel better than they are right now in life.
And David, I know you're going to show this to the world. We're all going to get to finally see it on September 19th. But what are some final thoughts or what you want audiences to really take away? You're on mute. It's not 2021 if that doesn't happen.
That's right. It happened all across 2020 as well. First, I'd like to say that this is a movie that could not have been made anywhere else but public television. We might have suggested to some other distributor that we can make a movie of this scale, and they would have said, yes, please have it on our desk in a year. But at PBS, we are allowed to have the support and the space to do this over 7 years. And it really required that amount of time to turn over every rock and find every bit of footage, find new perspectives on Muhammad Ali, find new footage that people hadn't seen, and make sure that we got every detail right. And so PBS is the only home for a movie like this. Something that I learned about Muhammad Ali is that, he was a man who in his prime could stop traffic in Manhattan and draw a crowd and feel the love. And I think he enjoyed receiving that love as much as the people enjoyed getting it from him. But he could also bring an entire country to a halt in the Muslim world. And he could go there for 3 days and everything would stop and it would become a holiday. And I think that was really important to him. I think he was a man on a mission, and the mission was to touch as many people with his heart as he could. And I think he was always willing to sign every autograph. He was always willing to whether the cameras were there or not, to give something back. And I think he knew always that every life that he touched, that those people would be telling that story for the rest of their lives. They would cherish that photograph. They would share it on a panel. They would remember the story about it. They remember what their dad said about it. Everywhere we went, people said that. And there's a moment in the movie where he suggests that maybe he's stopped fighting. He's a young man. He's never been beaten before. And he says, well, maybe I will stop fighting. Well, what will you do? I don't know, but I'm here for a reason. And I think that reason was to touch all of us in a particular way. And I think he did that right to the very end. Even when he had lost his voice, he was still able to connect to people with the raise of an eyebrow, with a magic trick. Parkinson's had robbed him of so much, and yet he still had that sparkle, and he still was on that mission. And I'm moved by that every day. It's been such a privilege to spend these last 4 years every day thinking about Muhammad Ali and trying to see how we could bring him to everybody.
Thank you, David, Paul, and Dr. Whitaker for providing our members with this exclusive opportunity and this really robust conversation. It didn't feel in any way long enough. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Make sure you tune in September 19th at 8 p.m. on KPBS. Muhammad Ali will finally premiere, and you can watch the entire show instead of just the preview. Public radio stations like KPBS would not exist without your support from members like you. Thank you. We have more Directors Club and Producer Club events coming up this year. Please look out for more information about them in your email box. It's been wonderful getting to connect with all of you, and I hope you join us for many more events in the future. Thank you so much.